Welcome to Decker Tech. I'm Aaron Decker, and today we're going to be talking about pets. Not necessarily how to unlock them, but how to utilize them best. Maybe some tips and tricks of things that you may not know about the interactions between some of these pet skills and their owners and or the monsters in the game. Without any ado, let's get right into it. So, of the pets, the kind of ways, there are two ways to decide on which ones to pick up. There's some that are very character specific and some that are just generically useful. So, as an example here for a character-specific one is Orby. Although Orby has no downside, it just says plus shield to all teammates. There is one hero in particular that benefits supremely from this. It's the only hero you're likely to get the shield perks, and it's the hero that says when you shield someone, you heal them based on the amount of shielding. So, Otis and Orby go together hand in hand. If you're running Otis, odds are you're going to be wanting to run Orby as your pet, and there's just 100% upside, and it's a very beautiful combination. And then things that are more generically useful is something like Oculi. So Oculi says all monsters, sight, and mind. And you're like, well, not everyone does sight and mind. Well, that doesn't matter, because the important part about Oculi here is that it's applying 2 debuffs to all enemies, which is something unique to Oculi, and it's really good for removing buffer from the opponents. And if you do happen to have any sort of perks into either of these, that's just added benefits. So Oculi, Nezglect is going to be the one that wants to pick it up at all times if Nezglect's on the team, because Nezglect heals off of sight and mind, madness, sight and madness, and we'll be getting perks and items to help buff those up. But even with Nezglect on my team, I might consider putting Oculi on someone else, just because Oculi is stripping that buffer away from my enemies. And there are some heroes that it's very important that buffer not be there for, like, say, Magnus, because Magnus, some of his cards are, say, hey, I want to AoE down, I want to AoE slow and vulnerable to all the enemies, but if I'm doing a hexproof corruptor, or for some reason all the enemies have, or multiples of them have buffer, I want to not run into that buffer. I don't want that buffer to eat up my useful debuffs. So what Oculi does is I put Oculi on Magnus, and then suddenly on Magnus takes his turn, clears away 2 buffer from all the enemies, and then makes room for him to do his howling and shouting to debuff the entire enemy team. So that's why Oculi is just generically useful. Yes, if Nezglect's on the team, Nezglect's probably going to be the one picking it up. But if even if Nez isn't on the team, someone on your team should probably have Oculi just for that powerful effect. Just for the, hey, I don't have anything to increase this, but I'm just applying 2 debuffs to all the enemies. This is also very useful for bosses that have self-dispels. If I have even 1 point in either sight or madness, this will stick around to the beginning of the enemy turn. It'll keep up 1 slot for that. Say that the tree is a very useful, like, everyone runs into the tree. You got to get past the tree, and the tree has a self-dispel. But if you have Oculi as your first, on your fastest character, say Magnus again, he'll have the sight and the madness as the first 2 debuffs on the enemy, and then you apply like an intimidate or a howl, and suddenly that vulnerable is your 3rd debuff and won't be removed by the dispel from the tree. So Oculi is really good just generically on the team, on some of your fastest characters on the team to get rid of that buffer at critical points, and then on Nezglect as just an extra healing, because Nezglect will have perks in these and it'll be adding healing to the team. So don't be afraid to run Oculi on any team composition, because it's just generically useful. And then a weaker example of that is going to be Slimy. Slimy says poison to all monsters, so that's only 1 buffer. But that's still, it adds up really quick, and it is very noticeable impact. Sometimes you just need 1 extra debuff to be able to get through that buffer to get that important debuff you're looking for on the enemy. I'd say not so much generically useful, but every team's going to want, is Sharpie. Sharpie says dispel self and gains speed on self. Both of these are really fantastic for your frontliner or fastest character. So your fastest character will continue to stay your fastest character throughout the fight, and or your front character will have all the debuffs that are piled on that front player removed. So any team can be happy with a Sharpie. Any team can be happy with an Oculi. There's just no downsides to them. And they are probably the 2 most powerful, I would say, most purchased by me pets, because there's always an upside to them, and I always, like, they always have impact. Like, yes, some of these pets there's no downside, but you don't really feel the difference between having them and not having them. These two, I always feel the difference because of the reasons mentioned. And then a lot of these other pets, what I want to talk about next, are pets that deal damage. So Stormy says, hey, Lightning Bolt, I deal Lightning, I deal Spark. You'd think this is really great for Wilbur, which, yes, this is a good damage increase for Wilbur or anyone dealing lightning damage. But the one kind of note of caution here is that these random monster attacks happen before your turn, and you have no control over who they hit. Some enemies have enchantments that do very nasty effects, and ranging from anywhere to shackling yourself, hitting your entire team, silencing yourself. So the worst day you're ever going to have as a caster in this game is having this big turn planned out, having the enemy have that silence enchantment on them, and your pet hitting it before your turn, and you can't cast a single card out of your hand, and you just skip your entire turn. That has happened to many a person. So be ye warned about pets that have attacks. They have it's really nice to have that free extra attack, but sometimes triggering that enchantment on the enemy, or if someone, say, has a lot of thorns and you're super low health, you can just kill yourself by your pet having no control over your pet attack. And so those pets are the Stormies, the Leantes, whatever, the Flamies, and the Betties of the world. Because all those pets will do an attack. And yes, it's nice to have the attack, but you could run into situations where it just really outweigh that effect. So with that, some of these pets are also elemental pets. Stormy is lightning, Flaming is fire. Things like fire and shadow have a big... there's a big reason that's important is because Cornelius will do self-burn. He'll hurt himself with fire, so having fire resistance on him is great. And then Zek will hurt himself with dark and shadow, so having shadow resistance on him is great. Both of these have an attack version pet, but the fire also has Asmodee as a alternative to Flaming, because Asmodee is still running burn and it still has fire resistance, but it's not doing an attack, so you don't accidentally trigger one of those enchantments. So I'd say for Cornelius, if he's doing any sort of self-burn, I highly recommend the Hellmark over... Actually, probably all versions of Cornelius. Asmodee's better just because you're not triggering those enchantments. And Asmodee, if you look at him, has this triple debuff going on, which, as I mentioned, Buffer before, Asmodee is one of those pets that it doesn't matter who's on your team. Asmodee is generically useful just for removing Buffer and applying a slow. Because you don't have to have many you don't have to have any perk points in the slow for that slow to matter. Yes, it's random, but you're not going to hurt yourself by accidentally applying 3 debuffs to one of the enemy. Like the slow thing might screw up your turn order a little if you're trying to make the enemy go in front of you, but that's such a rare case that I highly doubt you're going to run into any problems running Asmodee. So Asmodee fits one of the generically useful for that reason. And like I said, the resistances on the pet does matter for very specific characters. And Slimy is generically useful for all resistances. But not everyone on your team can have a Slimy. So, alas, you got to pick and choose your resistances here. The Bunny, the cheapest. It's got the generically +2 all resist. Like, if you have an empty slot, pick up the Bunny. The problem with the Bunny and these Beavers is their buff is only every 2 turns. So you're not getting it on the first turn, which is the most important turn of the game. And you're getting it on the second turn. But for the Bunny specifically, unfortunately, you're not getting the benefit until turn 3. Because Bunny's effect is on turn 2, speed yourself up, which doesn't make a difference till you hit round 3. So, of all the pets, Bunny has the slowest effect, but it's also the cheapest, and it's a generic +2 all resistances. So, like, it doesn't hurt to just buy the Bunny and then later replace the Bunny with something else. Sorry, Bunny, I've moved on to, say, a Beaver. With the Beavers... they are going to have... None of them have these attacks, so you're safe on that. And they'll have very specific strategies in mind. So, Champy, with this plus block, any person can pick this up, but anyone that has the block charges is going to greatly be affected by the increase in this. You also want it on your fast characters or your Heiners if your team has the Fortify. Chompy, this one, do not underestimate how powerful drawing a card can be. Yes, it only happens on turn 2, but you get the effect immediately on turn 2, unlike the rabbit. So these Beavers, are a little slow, and I normally don't pick them up, but they do have great effects when they come around. And the Carp in specific, even if you don't have perks in it, this is heal someone for 5 and draw a card. Which, remember, this card was not a card you drew from your deck. This was a card that was given to you for free. So this is an additional card draw that turn. And it doesn't require Inspire. This is like basically one free Inspire for the turn. So every 2 turns, draw an extra card is what Chompy says. It's fantastic. Generically useful for that reason. And then Chumpy is if you have any sort of wet strategy for either a chill team, a lightning team, or a baptism team. But again, it's only every 2 turns, so be warned there. And then all the other pets are just very specific elements. I would say there was something I wanted to say about Leanti. I don't remember what it was. Oh well. I think that mentions everyone. Oh, Mozzie. That's the only other one. So Mozzie is a unique effect that you want to play around with Fury. If you have a member like, say, Grookly or anyone that's doing like... There's a couple weapons that create Fury every time you do melee attacks. Those characters you're going to want to pick up the Mozzie so that you're dispelling the bleed on yourself. Unless, of course, you're wanting the bleed on yourself to do cards, because this happens at the beginning of your turn. It happens after the bleed hits you, but before you can take your turn. So if you want the bleed stacks for any reason, you can't run Mozzie because you'll never have access to those bleed stacks. Yep. That's what I missed. So... when I come to the shop, I say, who on my team is going to pick up Oculi? Can I afford a Sharpie? And is there any character that specifically needs some sort of resistances? If I'm planning on a slower game, I'll be looking at Champy and Chompy, because this is drawing cards and getting AoE block for the team. Both very valuable generic effects. And then I will... as I'm leaving the shop, make sure everyone has a pet. Anyone that doesn't have the pet, I just pick up the bunny for the +2 all resistances, because that's basically saying 1 free perk point for the character, because 2 resistances cost you 1 perk. So you might as well pick it up. And then, of course, I guess Slimy's kind of on the whole, can I afford Slimy? The problem is Slimy is just weaker than Oculi, and like if I'm running Slimy, it's usually for the buffer factor, not the resistances factor. But do not be shy about just picking up a generic all resistance for yourself. Yeah, I was talking a lot about pets. I kind of like Reginald. You're gonna pick up Betty just for having an attack card, but it's, you got to be scared of those attack cards sometimes. They can ruin a run. You can lose a run to having a random attack on your team. And I know ruin a fight and then restart the fight, but sometimes it's a run ruiner depending on how difficult your run is going. So generically useful, Oculi, Sharpie, Slimy, and Asmodee are my 4 go-to ones. And then next I'll go looking for the Champion Chompy. And maybe obviously the Orby if I've got Otis, and the Mozzie if I've got a bleed hero. Alright, I'm done babbling. I will catch you later. If you like this and you like what you see, please let me know by a comment saying, hey, great stuff, because that goes a really long way with me. Goes a really long way with me. Also, there is the tip option, the little heart under the screen here or above the comments, and I will catch you later. Peace.